State's curriculum, training, and professional development project called Engage New York. And that's where I had the privilege of working with Kate as we started to implement Engage New York in New York City many years ago. Earlier, she was the executive director of New Leaders and a founding principal of a model transfer high school for overage unaccredited students in New York City. And she began her career as a high school English teacher in Indianapolis Public Schools. So give a warm welcome to Kate Gerson.
I was just told I had as long as until I felt ready. Forgive me looking back at this read because I'm not used to being quite in that position, but good afternoon. Almost good evening. Thank you for finishing your day with me. I know you have no idea who I am. I'm so sorry you had to listen to a too long paragraph about me, but I'm so excited to be with you. And after the bits of information I just heard about a few of you and the reaction I saw from the rest of you, I think I am beginning to understand the room I'm in and who you are. And so I'm honored to be in it and near you. So I want to talk to you very briefly. I think I'll go, if it's okay, Jack, until like 1:15. Is that okay? I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea of equity, which is a concept and a construct that we throw around a lot. And I wanted to talk to you about my sense, my analysis of what it can mean, what it should mean, and what it doesn't mean. It's a word that, in my opinion, has become overused and hollow when it is not applied purposefully, thoughtfully, substantively around the details of what is learned, how much is learned, by who and when. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit with you today. I bring NAEP into it simply because our test scores, our summative test scores and our NAEP scores are the scores that tell us who in our care can read, who in our care can do math. And when I say read or do math, I mean on grade level. Because when we're not on grade level, we are not on track for college and career by the time the students graduate. So NAEP tells us where we are. And in Boston, this is where we are. That's very normal nationally. This quick stat, from 92 to 17, the US has gone from 29 to 36% proficiency. That's reading, math is a little bit lower. But we have to kind of check in with ourselves about when we're celebrating success, when we're thinking about how far we've come and also how hard we work. We have to check in with the reality of the situation, which is that our students can't yet read. They can't yet do math on grade level in such significant numbers that we have to stand still and look directly at the details before we are asking ourselves whether or not we are providing an equitable learning environment. When we celebrate metrics such as college enrollment, growth on measures such as STAR or iReady, AP enrollment, coverage, instructional coverage, or state test outperformance, meaning we were the highest performing in X group, or we outperformed the city, or we outperformed the state. When we're looking at the metrics on the left-hand side of that table, we're forgetting to look at the metrics on the right-hand side. So we're forgetting to look at who stays in college, who is persistent there, who at the end of the year is ready for the next grade, who is passing AP, who is learning instruction, and who at the end of their high school experience with us is ready for college. Those are the questions we need to be asking. The right-hand column is who in my care can read, who in my care can do math. The rest of it is fine. Celebrate our growth. Celebrate what we have done that we hadn't done before. Celebrate what we're doing that others aren't doing. But at the end of the day, we have to come to terms with the fact that the numbers around who is actually ready for the next grade and for the next phase of their lives is totally unconscionably, unacceptably low. So when we start to break down where we are and who in our care can read and who in our care can do math, one of the most important statistics, and this is a study from 2011, but I still use it because it is incredibly specific about the importance of grade by grade readiness. So if we look at third grade reading is the year according to the standards, and everybody in the room is accountable around this question of reading, right? No matter what content area, no matter what role. This question of who can read by third grade. By third grade, students need to walk in the door ready to read to learn, meaning get information from the page, meaning get new information that they did not have, assimilate it with what they did have, and apply it to the next thing they read. And if they can't do that when they get to third grade, that is when they immediately start losing ground. That is when they immediately start falling behind, because if they don't consume the information, assimilate the syntax, the vocabulary, the knowledge into what they do in fourth grade, then they can't access what's on the page in fourth. And then they miss that information, that syntax, that vocabulary, that knowledge, and they are starting to compound a skill deficit. And those of us who teach secondary know when we receive students in ninth grade or even sixth grade, who were these students who are behind already in third, it's the same cohort of kids. And they fall farther behind. So 1 in 4 Black and Latino students who aren't reading proficiently by third grade won't graduate on time. The numbers bear out about the same and sometimes worse when you are looking at poverty. Students live in poverty and not reading proficiently are 13 times more likely to not graduate. We have to organize ourselves, our schools, our work, and our sense of where we are as if each grade is a staircase. So if that landing at the top is walking across our stages, ready to go to college, ready to thrive in college, we've got to be real with ourselves about who's ready for first grade when they leave K, who's ready for second when they leave first, who's ready for third, and that important benchmark, when they leave second. If we're not constantly examining the readiness of each child, and therefore the grade level work being given to each child. I'm not going to be ready for third if I'm not doing second grade work. I'm not going to be ready for fourth if I'm not doing third grade work. So the weight of our responsibility is largely around what are we putting in front of our students. When we're talking about equity, we have got to also constantly be talking about whether or not the work we're handing our students is grade level. If it isn't, we are not providing an equitable environment. Students who walk across the stage are not necessarily ready for what they're going to do. We confuse graduation rates and readiness rates. So here's one number. Students with degrees who reach ACT college readiness, if you break down by race who is actually ready, as measured by just 3 benchmarks, 3 different content areas in ACT, when they walk across the stage, it's 50% of whites, 24% of Latinos, and 12% of Black students. That's a number from as recently as 2017. And what happens when they get to college becomes even more of a crisis. If students take only one remedial class, meaning one class that has content for which they are being remediated from high school content, one class, they already have less of a shot at graduating with a degree within 8 years. So one remedial class, meaning one part of not ready, means they are already more likely to leave that campus or that experience with debt and no degree. So I submit a solution to where we are. I submit a set of ideas that is built soundly on a body of research that I'm calling anti-racist teaching, because I think we're seeing more and more and feeling more and more that we have to be doing something. We have to be changing something. So what I submit to you is that within your sphere of influence is a set of decisions that could turn all of the education in you, that you are providing, that your community is providing, that the people within your sphere of influence are providing, could be inherently anti-racist. And it involves these three components: curriculum, instruction, and cultural responsiveness. Now, I know in many other contexts there's a lot of conversation about cultural responsiveness. And I won't presume to give you more information than you already have about it. So I won't go on about that for too long. But I want to bring your attention to the curriculum and instruction and how that feeds into and is connected to that cultural responsiveness, about which I know you all already know quite a bit. So curriculum. When I say curriculum, I'm talking about what you have in front of you and what you're using already, which is a comprehensive, aligned set of materials. If you are not attending to the details and the tasks and what is written in the content that you have been given, then you are immediately stepping out of that anti-racism. Because when we think of one of the studies I like to look at most is if we look at the impact of an effective teacher, the effect of a good curriculum is as much as a good teacher. The effect of crap curriculum is actually larger than the positive effect of us being good teachers. This is where we get most of our stuff. Am I lying? Well, you won't say that. But according to several national surveys, 99.8% of us get our stuff from online at this point. But there's all this stuff written into good curriculum. There's all this research that we don't necessarily have time to learn that is written into good curriculum. This is one of the key parts of it. This acquisition of knowledge and information and vocabulary. I'm not going to go into too many of these details, but this is important. We've got to help them build knowledge and catch up. We've got to put grade level complexity in front of them. Are level readers still alive here? Do you guys have boxes of A, B, C, D? Okay. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about ways of shifting out of that and looking more and more at the complexity involved in the curriculum that you have. You have to be constantly offering students grade level complexity. So that's the curriculum, that's just the baseline. The next thing is, am I implementing the curriculum I've been giving in an anti-racist way? And what I mean by that is, am I looking at the students in front of me constantly as if they are emerging intellectuals? Meaning, am I asking the students in front of me as if I care what they think? Am I asking questions where I'm pausing because I'm not entirely sure what they think? And I don't have an opinion about what they should think? How often are we asking a question where it's, guess what's on the teacher's mind? Guess what my analysis of this is? How often are we looking at our students and seeing them as thinkers, as emerging analyzers, as critical analysts of what is in front of them? We are, as a field, as a collective, as a community of humans sitting in a room, we are all capable of and currently possess bias. We have all grown up in a racist country, built on racist ideas. Those racist ideas are in each of us. They manifest in extremely different ways in white people than they do people of color, but they do exist in all of us. When we are looking at our students, we have got to accept, we've got to come to terms with the fact that it doesn't make me an evil person if I am looking at my kids with bias. It makes me human, and I will be a better person if I take a close look at that every day, if I talk to my colleagues about that every day. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I have where the people I'm talking to are saying, or will raise their hand, or in more casual conversation, I mean, yes, but I don't do that. I understand it's a huge problem, but it's not me, right? It is you. The reason I know this is because it thrives across sectors. It's not just us, of course. It's not just educators. It thrives across sectors. It thrives in the legal sector. Here's one study where a group of associates were given an essay written by, as it was labeled, a Caucasian writer, and another set were given an essay as it was written by an African American writer. The difference in the feedback that was given was remarkable. The Caucasian writer, generally good writer, but needs to work on so-and-so, has potential, needs to work on so-and-so, good analytical skills. African American, needs a lot of work, can't believe he went to NYU, average at best. Same essay. Same essay. Bias influences housing. What realtors will show a client, regardless of income or status, will change depending on race. What a client will be shown, what a buyer will be shown. The bail that will be put upon a defendant changes dramatically by race. I'm not telling you things you don't know, I'm just compounding it and saying it's everybody, which means it's also us. Here's a study about us. 132 preschool teachers were shown a video, and they were asked who in this video is going to need attention from you, extra attention from you. 42% said the black boy, 13% said the white girl. No problematic behavior was shown in the video. Discipline, suspension rates are disproportionately applied. I sat with some of you earlier today talking about culture, school culture, talking about school discipline. Our bias plays out in our discipline. Our bias plays out in how we perceive our students and how we think of them. Are they a threat? Are they about to become a problem? The no excuses culture, the culture of policing black bodies in classrooms, is inherently contraindicated with doing grade level work. It's inherently contradicted with anti-racist teaching because you can't think if you're worried about stepping out of line. We've got to hold an environment where discipline or punishment or referrals is the last resort, and we're creating an environment where I'm asking you to think. I'm not asking you to stay in line, I'm asking you to think. And that's a very different orientation, because otherwise we end up playing out our biases in ways that damage lives. We end up playing out our biases in who gets designated gifted, who gets put into AP classes. Here's one study where a community, instead of asking parents and teachers who was gifted and talented, just screened everybody. Black students were 74% more likely to be identified as gifted. Latino students, 118% more likely. Grade level work is justice. This is just a list of studies that says if they do grade level work in this content area, it's justice. If they do grade level work in this, I'm not going to go through them all. I want you to know I'm speaking to you from a body of research. And there are so many questions that need to be answered and so much work that needs to be done so that we understand and even learn how to do that, given the fact that we are receiving every year students who aren't ready for the grade I teach. But it's justice. And I promise you that some of this is a trust fall. Some of this is, all right, let me try. Let me see what that would look like. TNTP recently did a study nationally with tens of thousands of students, where students, regardless of race, were able to do grade level work at about the same rates. However, in classrooms that were largely segregated, classrooms serving mostly white students, 54% of them, had 54% more grade level assignments, had 4 times more grade level lessons, had 23% more engaging experiences. We offer affluent white children and Latino and African American children totally different learning experiences and environments in our country. This is what happens. This is a phenomenon that is real, that is enacted by every one of us. We are the system. We're the grown-ups in the system. When we say the school system is racist, when we say systemic racism, I'm talking about this level of detail because we are the system. There is no one left behind us. Like, we're the grown-ups in this, at this point. And so if this manifestation of systemic racism is documented system after system after system, the study was very comprehensive. It's happening in your classrooms. You're part of the problem. I'm part of the problem. The people you work with every day are part of the problem, and the only way we're going to move this is if we admit that, cope with that, and then look directly at the details constantly together. I've got 3 quick assignments up here just to show you what I'm talking about. If you know me at all, you know I'd much rather have all of you have student work in front of you and we're talking about it for an hour and a half. But I'll settle for 3 slides, where I simply tell you about 3 well-meaning teachers. The first one is an 8th grade teacher who handed out a copy of the Bill of Rights and also handed out a student-ready version, a student-friendly version of the Bill of Rights, which was written at a 2nd grade reading level for her 8th graders. She didn't do this out of malice. She didn't do this out of a conscious racism. But she did this out of an orientation to her students that was informed by racist ideas, that the students in front of her couldn't. Here's another, where a framework was handed to a group of 9th graders, telling them in the most controlling, minute detail how to construct thought, including my least favorite scaffold in the entire world, this center middle one, sentence frames, sentence starters. The only students who need that, who need your help building a sentence of their own ideas, are entering English learners. Nobody else needs that kind of support. We're over-supporting, we're overcompensating. And then here's a young man writing about the Declaration of Independence. One of the ways our low expectations manifest, one of the ways our racist ideas manifest, is when we're in a room working hard in whatever role we have, and we're looking at students toiling at the page. When we look more closely at what they are constructing, so often students are not doing the thinking that would be grade level appropriate. They are copying the question, they are copying the text, or they are writing a series of words that have been written on the board or said out loud in the room. This is this young man's analysis of the Declaration of Independence. Basically, this text was about, in the beginning, the author introduced the document, and the point he was trying to get across that when groups decide it's necessary to split, it's necessary to give reasons for the split. Split was written on the board in 2 different places. And this work was being, my point is, accepted. This work was being tolerated and treated as, we're having a productive afternoon here. So this young man was not being asked what he thought about the words on the page. This young man was not being asked what he could pull together from the words and the phrases that he could access on the page. This young man was being asked to reproduce what the teacher's analysis of the opening of the Declaration of Independence was. And this is what he could grasp from what she was saying. If students, and this is a junior in high school, if students are still hanging on by the time they get to us in high school, it's because they have learned how to survive. They have learned how to behave as if they've read. This young man is behaving as if he's read and understood the text in front of him. And if we are looking at him and accepting that as good enough, as like, fine, we can all go home now, that's the manifestation of a set of racist ideas. We face a life-threatening epidemic of standards-like instruction. I'm saying if we continue to graduate students at the rates that we do, at the actual college readiness that we are, we're hurting them. We're injuring them, and we're setting them up. We're not doing what we tell them we're doing. They all come to us believing if I do what you ask, I'll be ready. If I do all the things you ask, I'll be a doctor. I'll be a dentist. I'll be a lawyer. I'll be a nurse like my aunt. If I do what you ask, I'll be the thing I imagine myself becoming. But we aren't setting them up. We are releasing them with 75% of them unable to read on grade level. We're not doing what they think we're doing. The third part of anti-racist teaching is cultural responsiveness. The one piece I want to say about cultural responsiveness is that it requires intensive race work. It requires a commitment to systematic conversations about race, racism, and bias in us. It requires a community of people showing up every Thursday or every Wednesday or whatever it is, once a month for an entire day. And doing the deep work of learning more about the history of racism in our country, doing the deep work about how racism is manifesting in each of us as individuals. This stamina piece is largely for my people. White people aren't nearly as used to talking about race as our colleagues of color. We get to opt in and out of those conversations. I'm saying we have to build alone without asking our colleagues of color to witness. We have to work alone, separate, together, at learning how to talk about race. The top one too, learning about the history of racism in our country. Learning about how racism currently manifests in our country. White people, we generally are walking around with no idea of how this works, of what's happened here, of what is happening here daily to the students we serve and to the colleagues we serve with. So my people, white folks, we have an enormous amount of catching up to do about having any kind of information about what's going on. And all of us collectively have a responsibility of sitting down together, learning together, being together. There's an emerging body of research around how it changes us to talk about race, how talking about race interracially changes us and makes it more possible for us to talk about race. And this cultural responsiveness business is going nowhere if we don't talk about race. It's super unpleasant because racism is so ugly and so upsetting and so triggering, less so for me because I am white. And the more I recognize my whiteness in the role of my whiteness in a conversation about race, the more I'll be doing to end it in my community. But I cannot participate in anti-racist teaching if I'm not showing up for serious conversations about race, learning no matter what I look like. There's a quote I wanted to bring into that consciousness from Martin Luther King. Is anyone interested in reading that quote? Someone near me, so I'll just run too far.
I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace with the presence of justice. Martin Luther King Jr.
So our attention, our work, our social justice work, our anti-racist work, is this body of change. All three of these ideas represent change. Ensuring that we are adhering to the aligned curriculum we are given, ensuring that our enactment of that curriculum is consciously, openly intellectual engagement with our students, and a real examination of whether or not it is based on what they look like. And then third, the cultural responsiveness work, which involves so much personal growth and so much community time and so much pain and so much commitment and so much pushing through to the next time, and quite frankly, so much love. Because your liberation is bound in my liberation, and my liberation is bound in your liberation. And I will screw up. I maybe have since I've stood in front of you. You will screw up. White people will screw up way more often because we have so much less consciousness and so much less information. And there's a level of trust and relationship that will be required if we are actually going to walk through this door together. We've got to decide who we want to stand with and not sit down. We have lots of feelings about the racism in the world right now. There are 1,000 images that any one of us could have chosen to represent racism as it's currently manifesting in the United States. If we're angry about this stuff, if we're angry about conscious, assertive, destructive, genocidal racism, we have to also be concerned with our racism, our sphere of influence, which is not a conscious, aggressive, destructive, intentionally hurtful racism, but it is the same construct. It is the same racist ideas about an intellectual inferiority that is grounded in anti-Blackness and ends up being applied also to Latinos. This is what our country was built on. This is what we've breathed growing up. This is what we apply when we offer our students sub-grade level work. That is how we are manifesting all of that ugliness. It doesn't feel the same. We think of ourselves as warriors. We think of ourselves as servants, and we are. But we're not accomplishing what we think we're accomplishing. We're not accomplishing what our students and their parents believe we're offering. We're not. Because so often we're giving them sub-grade level work, and we're walking them across our stage and watching them celebrate with their families, knowing that at best they're gonna go into college and need remedial classes. And they are immediately at risk for dropping out with debt and no degree. If this is what we offer. We've got to examine the details together. I know you have somebody you plan with. Talk to them about grade level work. Talk to them about the obstacles. Talk to me, we're gonna have a quick Q&A. Talk to each other constantly about the obstacles to grade level work. What stands in your way as you think about trying to look at the details, remove as many scaffolds as you possibly can, and let the students and let yourself trust fall into grade level complexity in both math and literacy. Otherwise, it's all just an idea, and it's just a thing we say, and it's just an identity we have. But it's empty, and we're not yet doing our part. Jack, you still want to do Q&A?
We can take one or two questions.
One or two questions.